Welcome to the Everything podcast. I'm your host, Curtis, and this is the bi-weekly show where I talk about everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. Whether this is your first time listening or your 100 and something time listening, thank you for listening. In today's episode, I'm going to cover the 1916 Western North Carolina flood. They called it the flood to end all floods. And what's kind of ironic is that flood was caused by tropical storms and hurricanes. I was going to record yesterday, but we were getting some rain from a tropical storm, and it's still pretty wet out here. So it's Saturday morning. I'm running a little bit late. And since I'm running late, I want to go ahead and get right into it. Like I said, the floods in West North Carolina, it came from tropical depression and or a hurricane. It was two different storm systems, and depending on which source you read, one of them was a tropical storm or a hurricane. But it all started in late June of 1916 when a tropical depression formed just off the coast of Nicaragua. And they said the storm reached hurricane status when it entered the Gulf of Mexico. Eventually, it would make landfall at Mobile, Alabama as a Category 3 hurricane. Now, keep in mind, back then, they didn't name tropical storms. They didn't name hurricanes. That didn't come around until the 50s. So when this storm, when it hit Mobile, Alabama, like a lot of tropical storms and hurricanes, the speed of the storm slowed down to just a bare crawl. But the problem, like most storms, even though the storm itself wasn't moving very much, the rain was still there. On July 5th, it started raining in western North Carolina, and it rained for 6 straight days. And finally, the rain stopped, but the ground was completely saturated. It had soaked up all that rainwater just like a sponge. And you might as well say it had soaked up all the water it could possibly soak up. So after it stopped raining, they had 3 days of peace. There was no rain. And then a second hurricane made landfall in Charleston, South Carolina. And this was July 14th. By the morning of July 15th, the eye of the storm was over top of western North Carolina. And it says around 22 inches of rainfall fell on western North Carolina, and that beat the national record at the time. Now, like I said, the ground was completely saturated from that previous storm. It couldn't hold any more water. So about 90% of this rain from this storm didn't even soak into the ground. It just ran off. Now, finally, that hurricane moved on, but it left a ton of rainwater behind. And all hell really started breaking loose on Sunday, July 16th, about 4 o'clock in the morning. See, you got the Swannanoa River. I normally say Swannanoa. I have no idea why I just said Swannanoa. And I'm not even sure if that's how you pronounce it. But it runs from Black Mountain to the French Broad River right there around Asheville. Well, all that rainwater finally jumped its banks early in the morning there in Asheville. And it really caught everybody by surprise. It was like an ambush. Everybody was just happy that all the storms had finally gone and they finally got some relief. They weren't even thinking about all that rainwater going somewhere. And it said that the river rose so quickly that people literally abandoned their cars in the street. They were just stopping what they were doing and running for high ground. Now, somewhere in here, I made some notes of the different depths of the rivers or the depths of the flood and the widths of the rivers. But it did say in this area, the gates of the Biltmore Estate, and I've not ever been to Biltmore Estate, but I've been to the gates. They're pretty tall. It said the water was 9 feet deep at the Biltmore Estate gates. A lot of people who couldn't find high ground, you would find them holding on to trees, climbing up in trees, holding on to lampposts. This water was just rushing pretty much downtown, and people were holding on to anything not to get washed away. Keep in mind, this wasn't just flood water. Like with a lot of floods, you had landslides. So the rivers flooded. Any loose dirt, rock, trees, it would come loose and get mixed up in the flow. So these people who were clinging to lampposts and trees and standing on top of their cars, it wasn't just rushing water. I mean, it was logs. First of all, the water was ice cold, like mountain water is, but it was logs and cars, and where buildings had collapsed, it was entire pieces of structure floating by at incredible speed. And so these people, they had to watch out for that too. And I took swiftwater rescue with the fire department. I can tell you that if you're in a river and a log floating by hits you, it's even though it's floating, it's not gentle. And then you had the boulders. You are in the mountains. There's giant boulders. They weren't floating, but the force of water was literally pushing these boulders just anywhere it could. An article in Our State magazine talked about Kathleen Carter. She said she held onto a maple tree for 9 hours during all this. She was 9 straight hours just holding onto this tree. And again, imagine the conditions, this ice cold water, all this crap floating by. I'm sure for 9 straight hours, she assumed she was probably going to die. Now there's a town called Marshall right down the road from Asheville. And it said in Marshall, 53 houses were destroyed. And in Madison County, by the end of this, it says there was only one railroad bridge still standing. Now, I talked about the Shenandoah River. But like I said, it flows into the French Broad. So it wasn't but a few hours after this that the French Broad River, it followed suit and it overflowed its banks. It grew to 21 feet deep, which was 17 feet higher than what they considered to be the flood stage. And the French Broad River is normally 380 feet apart. It said that the flood expanded it by 900 feet. So now the French Broad River is 1,300 feet wide. And the French Broad River, it runs down through the Asheville riverfront. So, it didn't take very long before the Asheville riverfront and Biltmore Village was completely destroyed. Another river in the area, the Catawba River, it rose by 30 feet. Now, I talked about the one remaining railroad bridge in Madison County. There's a picture, and I'll post it if I can. I was talking about the landslides. A lot of these railroad bridges were on ground, but after the flood, all the dirt under these, not railroad bridges, a lot of these railroad tracks, they were on the ground, but after the flood, where the water washed away all the dirt, these once sections of railroad track were suspended 30, 40 feet in the air. And there, like I said, there's a crazy picture I saw in my research. I'll link to it if I can't post it. But it looks like a power line. It's literally a railroad track, just a piece of railroad track hanging in the air. Again, it's a crazy looking picture. Now, about 50 miles from Asheville, you have Linville Gorge, and the Linville River flows through the gorge. And of course, it flooded too. It said the Linville River just kind of tore through the gorge. And I'll look next time I'm up there. But they said you can see boulders out in fields today around the Linville Gorge, and those boulders were moved there during this flood. Well, in the end, it took about 2 days for all this rainwater to finally go away, at least enough where they could start trying to clean up and rebuild and I guess get a toll of the damage. And on that note, they estimated that it was $22,1916 of damage. That's about $500 million today. They estimate that 80 people died and 800 miles of railroad track was destroyed. And the thing about the railroad track in 1916, that was how you got to Western North Carolina. Yes, there were roads, but the railroad track, it revolutionized travel in the mountains. So with all this railroad track destroyed, Western North Carolina was essentially cut off from the rest of the world. And that's the flood to end all floods. However, that's not the last flood in Western North Carolina. In 1940, there was another flood. This time it came from just one hurricane, not two different storms, and it made landfall in South Carolina again on August 11th, 1940. And I've talked about abandoned towns a few times on this show. One of the abandoned towns that I keep coming across in North Carolina is Mortimer. And I didn't know this until I'd done this research, but this storm here in 1940 is the reason Mortimer was abandoned. There's a creek up that way called Wilson Creek, and it rose to 94 feet, and it pretty much just took the town of Mortimer out. I know there are still some standing structures in Mortimer today, and it's one of the abandoned towns I want to go see. But, a lot of the abandoned towns, they run out of money, or they get swallowed up by something else, or people just move away, or a lake gets built on top of them. But Mortimer, they literally got out during the 1940 hurricane, and there was just nothing to return to. Now, I guess Western North Carolina did, learn a lesson. It's not their fault, but I guess they learned a lesson from the 1916 flood. So the 1940 flood, I think they were a little bit better prepared for it. And they were even more prepared when the same thing happened again in 2004. And the 2004, it was almost a recreation of the 1916. Two different hurricanes, Francis and Ivan, they were only 9 days apart, and they tore through Western North Carolina. Now, the storm in 1916, I said, dropped about 22 inches of rain. These storms, they were about 18 to 20 inches of rain, so it was pretty close. During the 2004 storms, 11 people perished, and the damage estimated around $200 million. And that $200 million damage, that was in like 7 counties around the Western North Carolina area. And that's all I have for this episode. Again, I told you it was going to be a short one. I did as much research as I could, but it ended up being a short one. But that's the flood to end all floods. Again, that's what they called it back then, and the flood to end all floods. And I think at the time it was probably one of the worst floods in the country. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I want to pepper in some short ones every once in a while. My next one, I'm not going to give it away, but it's probably going to be a lot longer. The research looks very in-depth. But anyway, if you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And check out the links for more NC Everything content. That's all I have, so I'll talk to you in a couple weeks.